All right. I think about this class as, you know, if this were a play, we'd be getting all of the actors on stage. We do need to spend some time covering the diversity of living things that are out there. And we've talked about the basic features of all life, at least as far as we know. And the last thing I mentioned was that we can divide all living things that we know into three enormous groups called domains, each one of which contains millions of species. Eukaryotes, or the domain eukarya, the cells contain nuclei, these bags of DNA, and specialized compartments internally that do various functions, analogous in some ways to the organs in your body, and we call those organelles. Cells that don't have nuclei or compartments are called prokaryotes. And there's two domains of prokaryotes. There's archaea and there's bacteria. Neither one of those have cells that have nuclei or compartments, organelles. The inside of the cell is basically one big open space. The only thing I really had to say about archaea is that many archaeans, although definitely not all, are extremophiles, meaning they live in environments that are extremely hot or cold or acid or alkaline or metal rich or salty or pressurized or otherwise the kind of place where nothing else can live. So there are archaeans that are living perfectly happily in acid hot springs that are basically the temperature of, take battery acid and heat it to the temperature of your coffee, and you're basically there. There are critters that could live in environments like that perfectly well. Probably the most extreme are the archaeans that have been found living here. This photo was taken about 5,000 feet down in the ocean, and what looks like black smoke coming out of these cracks in the ocean floor is actually superheated high pressure water with dissolved minerals in it, including a lot of iron and sulfur. And there are critters that live in this. Extremophile archaeans can live at temperatures over 220 Fahrenheit. We don't know if there might be life on Mars or Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's moon Enceladus. Those have all been proposed as possible places in the solar system where there could be life. If there is life there, it's probably something similar to archaeans like this. And there are some scientists that have worked for NASA studying organisms like this to try to gain some kind of insight into what we might find if we do ever get to explore other planets in the solar system. Or for that matter, why not even other planets outside of the solar system? It's more likely to look like this than it is to look like the Klingons. Okay, I didn't say much about what makes archaea and bacteria different because that gets into more chemistry than we've got time for. Just know that they are very different, although it's not obvious under a microscope. Most bacteria and most archaea are at most a few millionths of a meter in size. I'll mention again briefly that 1/1,000,000th of a meter is technically called a micrometer, but we often say micron. And micron is abbreviated with the lowercase Greek letter mu and then M for meter. And that mu kind of looks like the letter U with a tail dangling off to the left. That's the lowercase cursive form of the letter mu. even under the best light microscopes we can build, most bacteria look like little specks. There are limits to how high you can magnify something and see detail using light. So there's limits to how good a light microscope can be built. And the very best that can be built simply don't show you much detail other than, dots like this. Most bacteria are also translucent when they're alive. Some do have pigments in them, but most of them are very hard to see unless you add chemical stains. These bacteria are not naturally purple. They don't naturally look like grapes. They've been treated with a chemical stain called Gram stain after a Danish guy named Dr. Gram, who came up with the way to do it. But if you could see these as they were when they were living, they would be almost completely transparent. We often do need to classify and identify bacteria. I used to do this all the time because I used to work as a volunteer laboratory tech in a place called the Berkeley Free Clinic back in my grad school days, back in the 90s when the Grateful Dead were still playing. And we did lab work in there every night that often involved identifying what sort of bacteria are living in this person's mouth or in this person's throat or up this person's urethra, various places where bacteria grow. And we had to identify them. That can be a little tricky. There's a lot to know. For our purposes, I'll just mention that we often use the shape of the cells. So dot-shaped bacteria, ones that are shaped like little balls, are known as cocci, C-O-C-C-I. We usually say cocci. Other bacteria might be shaped like rods. Here you can see there's a pair of them, but there's a rod-shaped bacterium, and it happens to be joined to another rod-shaped bacterium. If you could see this thing in 3D, it would look kind of like a sausage. And rod-shaped bacteria we call bacilli. So I had a student once who said, I can't remember what you call rod-shaped bacteria. And I said, don't be silly. And that was a joke, and I'm imagining you all laughing uproariously. Okay, now that you picked yourself off the floor, the third major type of bacterial shape are bacteria that are shaped like spirals. Usually under the microscope, they just look like little S-curves or sine waves or something like that. If you could see one in 3 dimensions, it would look like a little segment of a spring. And we call those spirilla. Very short spirilla just kind of look like little commas or maybe little beans. There's one down there below. And bacteria that are shaped like commas or little curves, we call vibrios. Vibrio is a very short little curved bacterium, whereas an extremely long spiral-shaped bacterium is called a spirochete. Lyme disease is the reason you need to check yourself or have someone check you for ticks every time you go outdoors in summer. There's a spirochete that causes a disease called Lyme disease, and it's spread by tick bites. And it happens to be a spirochete. The bacterium that causes syphilis is also a spirochete. And as I've just alluded, you don't just need to know this because biologists love to make up annoying words. You often do have to bring this into play if you're in a clinical setting trying to identify what bacteria are making somebody sick. You have to know what to look for. And we would often see examples of all three of these types of bacteria in the Berkeley Free Clinic. Any medical lab tech has seen them lots and lots of times. And we can identify bacteria further by looking not just at what shape the individuals are, but how they group together as they grow. There's some cocci that grow in bunches, and this is what they look like stained under the microscope. And cocci that grow in bunches we call staphylococci. If it helps, staphylos happens to be Greek for a bunch of grapes. And so we're clear, I will never test you on the meaning of Greek and Latin words. I'm never going to ask you a question. The Greek word staphylos means A, olive oil, B, charming cafe on a sun-drenched rocky coastline where the waiter brings you lots of wine. C, bunch of grapes. I'm never going to ask you anything like that. You don't have to memorize what these words mean, except that some people find it useful getting a handle on the vocabulary if you know where these words come from. If you remember a few Greek and Latin roots, many of those get reused in many different terms. So if you know the roots, you've got a leg up on learning the vocabulary. But again, I will never ask you what does staphylos mean in Greek, but it might help you remember staphylococci, the bacteria that look like bunches of grapes. Incidentally, you can get staphylococci causing infections in the skin. If anybody's heard of just getting a staph infection, that staph is short for staphylococci. There's a bacterium going around called MRSA. That stands for multi-drug resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is the Latin name of the species. And so the S in MRSA stands for staphylococci. That's the reason why you have to make sure you're careful about, sitting on clean towels in the locker room at the gym, things like that. Cocci growing in pairs. There's a pair of them right there. There's another pair. There's a pair of pairs, and so on. We call those diplococci because diplo happens to be Greek for double. These are double cocci. I used to see these a lot at the Berkeley Free Clinic because gonorrhea happens to be caused by diplococci. And I used to take little glass slips, glass microscope slides with samples of people's penile discharge, the pus-like stuff that drips out of the tip of your penis, and smear it on a piece of glass, apply some chemical stains, and look for diplococci. So I've seen an awful lot of diplococci in my time. Finally, cocci that grow in long chains are called streptococci. You might have heard of streptococci because some types of streptococci cause strep throat. That's where the strep comes from in strep throat infections. And someone has just posted, well, I'm done eating. Okay, I'm sorry about that. But having worked for several years in a medical lab, I'm pretty used to talking about things like this. It does not particularly bother me anymore. No, you're not. Well, I don't think you're going to be doing bacterial staining. And if you did, it would not be clinical samples. We did used to do it in earlier iterations of this course, but I think it was with different sources of bacteria. We didn't make people take samples from other people. You get all kinds of safety issues coming into play if you make people do that. Although I'm told they do sample bacteria from the students at Hendrix. You hear stories about students with cotton swabs walking one by one into the restroom and shouting, "For science!" But yeah, in this class, we're not going to do that. Yeah, you are not going to handle. Yeah, I know, but you're not going to do anything like that here. Not in 1400. If you go on into the health sciences, maybe. Anybody interested in going into health is probably going to handle more bacteria than just this. Okay, for more detail on bacteria, we have to use gizmos called electron microscopes, which can magnify much, much higher than light microscopes. They're a lot trickier to use and they cost a heck of a lot more, but they can magnify things up to 1,000,000 times greater than natural size. So this is what a bacillus, right, a rod-shaped or sausage-shaped bacterium looks like when you slice it in two. Like all cells, bacteria have a cell membrane. It's this thing going around. There are a few bacteria that only have a cell membrane. Some of them cause human diseases, like this thing called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is another fun thing you can get from ticks. But most bacteria, in addition to the cell membrane, have a stiffer structure outside the cell membrane called the cell wall. If you wanted to make a model of a bacterial cell, you could take a water balloon and stuff it into a tight-fitting cardboard box. And that's basically what bacteria look like. The water balloon would be the bacterial cell contents inside the cell membrane. And then outside the cell membrane, you have this much stiffer, firmer part called the cell wall, and that enables the bacterium to keep its shape. Different types of bacteria have different types of cell wall. We don't really need to get into that. Usually, at least some of the bacterial cell wall, sometimes all of it, sometimes only parts of it, are made of a compound of proteins and sugars stuck together, and we call that compound peptidoglycan. The reason this might actually matter is your cells don't make peptidoglycan. Bacterial cells do. A compound that was discovered back in, I think, the 1920s, but only introduced as a drug during World War II, called penicillin, blocks a bacterium's ability to produce peptidoglycan. And the same is true for related drugs like amoxicillin, ampicillin, cephalosporins. Amoxicillin, that's what they gave my kid when he had an ear infection. You might have taken some of these at some point. They work because they block bacteria from making peptidoglycan. Your cells don't make peptidoglycan, so a shot of penicillin will kill bacteria and leave your cells unharmed. And that makes penicillin-derived antibiotics generally very safe to use. They're targeted at something that bacteria do that your cells do not do, which is make peptidoglycan cell walls. So that's why penicillin was called a wonder drug when it was introduced. And its first introduction was Allied soldiers in World War II. And then after that, it came into civilian use. Okay, this might seem like trivia, but we're going to come back to this in several weeks, believe it or not. These happen to be cocci, probably diplococci, and surrounding the cell wall, the actual cells are these little dark dots. And these have been stained with probably just ink. And it stained the cells, but there's this clear zone around the cells that isn't stained. That's called a capsule. And the capsule is just a layer of slime, a layer of snot. And it's normally completely transparent, but with this ink stain added, you can see it as these halos around the actual bacteria. This can be important in determining whether a bacterium causes infection or not. Bacteria that make that capsule can sometimes cause severe disease because they are protected to an extent against what the immune system is trying to do. So bacteria that make that capsule in some cases can make you very sick, can grow in your body and give you an infection that your immune system cannot fight off. We will look at this later. Don't forget about bacterial capsules. It's going to be important down the road. Bacteria typically reproduce by splitting in two. This is a section through a bacterium that's been caught in the act. You can see there's two clumps of DNA, each one of which will end up in one of the daughter cells. And then this furrow where the cell is pinching in two, kind of like taking a very soft Tootsie Roll and pulling it at the ends. And right, it gets very narrow in the center and eventually pinches off into two pieces. That's more or less what this bacterium is doing. Bacteria can also have sex, but I'm not going to say much about that. We kind of have to cover some facts about DNA before I can explain bacterial sex in a way that's going to make much sense. Bacterial sex is called conjugation, and it doesn't really look like sex in, larger animals. But again, we will try to cover that down the road. Let's not worry about it just yet. Last thing I'll mention is some bacteria have a nifty trick. They can form capsules inside their cell wall called endospores. Endo, by the way, happens to be Latin for inside. And endospores have very thick walls, and bacteria can package their DNA and some of the liquid inside the cell, called the cytoplasm, inside an endospore, and it's kind of like an escape pod. Endospores are completely dormant, and they can withstand almost any conditions in suspended animation for years, possibly much longer than years. And what you're looking at here on the left, these are bacilli, and these light spots at one end of the cells, like there and there and there, all of these white spots that are showing up at one end, those are endospores forming. On the right is a different species of bacterium where the endospores are forming in the middle. But those white things right there are the endospores. And the endospores can just sit there for years on end until, if they happen to end up in favorable conditions, places where they've got food and water and everything they need, the endospores make like evanescence and start singing, "Bring me to life, wake me up inside, wake me up inside." Okay, sorry, got carried away there. They're from Little Rock, Evanescence. Okay, all right. Yeah, sorry, I kind of butchered it. I don't have the high notes I used to. The endospores of a bacterium called Bacillus anthracis. Bacillus anthracis causes a disease called anthrax. And it is possible to prepare those spores as a biological weapon. Uh, they look like a very fine white powder, and if you inhale them, you get very severe lung infections that are often fatal. And I now realize I'm starting to feel old, that this was probably before your time. But right in the aftermath of the destruction of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, somebody, probably a rogue scientist working for the military, regular mailed envelopes containing prepared anthrax endospores to various media outlets and politicians. 22 people were sick, 5 of them died. So this has never been used in an actual war. Okay, yeah, Evanescence is probably the best known band in modern times to come out of Little Rock. Although they've completely changed their lineup, and I don't know if all the current members are, but they got their start here. So anyway, anthrax bacteria have never been used in an actual war, but they've certainly been tested and they've certainly been stockpiled. And, you know, you don't have enough things to worry about. So let me just add that one. Okay, right. The reason this might matter to anybody is that we use all of these features, shape, size, growth form, structure of the cell wall, and others to identify things that cause disease. And anything that causes disease is called a pathogen. Pathogens could also include viruses, which, by the way, we are going to talk about, but not just yet, because viruses are not exactly alive. And explaining how they work and how they do what they do, we need to get through covering DNA and things like that first. But viruses would certainly count as pathogens. So do some protists and even some animals like parasitic worms. But many bacteria are pathogens in humans or animals. Some cause disease in plants. Pathogenic bacteria can contaminate food or water, things like that. So all this stuff I've been yapping about bacteria has a lot of very practical use. Everything from syphilis and gonorrhea to strep throat and MRSA to cholera and tuberculosis and Lyme disease and impetigo are all caused by bacteria. When bacteria enter your body, well, for one thing, they start breaking down your molecules and using them as food. They can start causing your own cells to break down. Many of them also make you sick because, like Britney Spears, they're toxic. Okay, maybe I still have those high notes. You know, they're bacteria and they're toxic. You're toxic. Anyway, sorry. Some bacteria produce toxins that are basically a part of the cell wall itself. The bacterium itself has these molecules stuck on it that act as a poison. So Salmonella, for example, does that. Other bacteria produce toxins that are released from the cell and can spread through the body. They can affect body parts very far away from where the actual bacteria are, and we call those exotoxins. That's what exotoxins can do. This is a painting of a British soldier probably dying of a disease called tetanus. This is what those tetanus shots are made to save you from. A bacterium called Clostridium tetani is very common in soil. It's very common in dirt. You can get it into your body just from a scratch from a dirty nail or something like that. And if it grows in your body, it starts cranking out an exotoxin. The exotoxin circulates through all of your body. The actual bacteria might just be living in the scratch on this guy's foot or someplace like that. But if the infection gets bad, the exotoxin can spread everywhere. And the effect that it has is to cause your muscles to contract and be unable to relax. So the first muscles that start locking up on you tend to be your face and jaw muscles. That's why tetanus is also called lockjaw, because your jaw tenses up and you can't move it. And then the rest of the muscles of your body start tensing up and losing the ability to relax. And that's what this unfortunate person, that's the state that he's in right now. Every muscle is contracted. They can't relax, and he may well die. Full-blown tetanus like this is very dangerous, even with modern medical treatments. There was a news article a couple of years ago about a kid whose parents wouldn't let him get a tetanus shot. He got tetanus, ended up spending an entire month in the hospital, most of it in intensive care, and he's lucky to be alive. So that's what exotoxins do. There's a related bacterium, by the way, that produces an exotoxin that also paralyzes your muscles. This is Clostridium botulinum. If you eat food contaminated with Clostridium botulinum, you get very severe food poisoning. But Clostridium botulinum can be grown in the lab, and the exotoxin that it produces can be extracted and purified, sold under the name Botox, and it's used by cosmetic surgeons to tighten up your facial muscles, paralyze your facial muscles temporarily, and get rid of wrinkles. So you end up with a face that's very smooth, that, you know, is frankly kind of expressionless and makes you look like you're made out of plastic, but some people like that. So yeah, anyway, Botox is an example of a bacterial exotoxin that you might have heard of that's actually got some clinical use. Okay, so much for bacteria that cause disease. The overwhelming majority of species of bacteria are completely harmless. There's maybe a couple of hundred bacterial species that might cause disease in you. There's millions of them that do you absolutely no harm at all. There are bacteria in every natural body of water. Your water company is supposed to purify your drinking water, but it's impossible to get every last bacterium out. So even the most carefully treated drinking water will have a few bacteria in it. Certainly naturally occurring water sources like lakes and rivers might have bacteria by the billions. There are bacteria in the air you breathe. There are lots and lots of bacteria in soil. You find them everywhere. I'll mention briefly that many bacteria require oxygen to live, but many others don't need oxygen and may even be poisoned by oxygen. They can only grow in habitats where oxygen isn't present. Bacteria that require oxygen we call aerobic bacteria. You can recognize aerobic bacteria under the microscope because they're the ones that are wearing leg warmers and going, and one, and two, and one, and two. Let's get physical, physical. What is it with me today singing female sung pop hits? Anaerobic bacteria are the ones that don't need oxygen. We'll come back to this at the very end, but many bacteria make a living by breaking down dead organisms. The dead leaves on the floor of a forest get broken down by bacteria along with eukaryotes called fungi. The bodies of dead animals rot. What that rot is bacteria growing in the dead animals, breaking them down into compounds that they need, and ultimately destroying the dead body. That decay process releases nutrients back into the environment for other living things to use, a process called nutrient cycling, which you've seen if you've ever maintained a compost pile or anything like that. There's a lot of bacteria that are actually used in industry. The one you might be most familiar with, although you might not realize it, are special strains of bacteria that are deliberately added to milk. They break down the sugar in the milk. They produce acid as a byproduct, so the milk stops tasting sweet and starts tasting sour. And the acid also makes the milk proteins clump up, so the milk gets thicker. And this is how you get buttermilk, sour cream, and yogurt. Those are all made from milk that has been inoculated with special strains of bacteria. Bacteria that are added to an alcoholic beverage like wine, beer, or cider break down the alcohol and convert it to acetic acid, which tastes sour. That's how you get vinegar. Cider vinegar, wine vinegar, malt vinegar, those are all made from alcoholic drinks in which the alcohol has been turned into acetic acid, which makes vinegar tart. Bacteria are deliberately added to certain cheeses to create complex flavor. Bacteria added to so-called Swiss cheese breaks down fat in the cheese, produces compounds that have this distinctive taste, and also creates bubbles. That's where the holes in Swiss cheese come from. Other bacteria that have other cheeses that have bacteria deliberately added are things like camembert and brie, if you're into, French cheese. There's other bacteria that are grown commercially that turn sugars into a food additive called xanthan gum. Xanthan gum feels creamy in your mouth and it's non-toxic, and it's added to foods like salad dressings that need to feel creamy but also need to stay stable on your shelf until World War III, whenever you're going to actually use the salad dressing. Bacteria do most of the work of breaking down waste in sewage treatment in your septic tank or in your sewage treatment plant. There are bacteria that can break down petroleum, and they've been used to clean up oil spills. Others can extract toxic metals from mining waste and are getting used in environmental cleanup. These lumps on the roots of these soybeans are formed by bacteria that live inside the plant roots. And those bacteria take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and convert it into a form that the plant can use. We actually have someone on our faculty, Dr. Mukherjee, that studies how bacteria do this. This boosts soil fertility. It helps the plants grow. This is common in legumes, which includes beans, peas, and clover. And there are thousands of bacterial species living in you, in every healthy human being. Every healthy human is a freaking bacterial farm. Something like half the mass of your feces are bacteria. Not that you really wanted to know that, but it's true. There are tons of bacteria living on your skin, over 100 species of bacteria living on the skin of healthy people. they're critical for maintaining human health. You would not be healthy if you didn't have them. And you can get foods and supplements that have probiotics. These are basically supposedly helpful bacteria that you can ingest in these dietary supplements that will help your digestion and improve your overall health. I don't absolutely know that all of them do much good, but that is what they are. If you take probiotics, what you're taking is bacteria in suspended animation that supposedly will grow in your tummy and make you healthy and help you lose weight and all that. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we are done for the day.